Hey guys, I wanted to film a different kind of video for you today. I've had a lot of requests in the comments section and also via email asking me to really explain in detail about how I overcame social anxiety, how I transformed my life and got myself to where I am today. So in this video, I'm going to go into a lot of detail about my whole life, my whole transformation. I'm going to show you behind the scenes and I'm going to reveal a lot of things which I haven't discussed in other videos. So stick around to the end. There's going to be a lot of actionable steps for you to use in your recovery from social anxiety. And I'm going to be going into great detail. So here's a longer video, but stick around. It's going to be well worth it. In this first picture, this is me at 4 years old. And I came across this picture recently and I found it quite interesting because I can see already how scared I am in this picture. You can see the way I'm tucking my neck in and giving myself a double chin. My nostrils are flaring out. They weren't like that. That's a completely fake smile. And I remember at that age, when a camera came out, I would immediately freeze up. I already had that reaction of feeling incredibly self-conscious if a camera was pulled on me. I remember at that age, I was also really scared of strangers. I remember going to my childminder's house being left in a room with two French exchange students. And already I was freaking out thinking, how the hell do I communicate with these two strange giants? I've got no idea what to say. At this point, we lived on an estate in the south of England near Southampton. And we had a pretty normal-ish kind of life. Both my parents were teachers. My mum used to teach in a borstal to make a bit of extra money, which is like a youth prison. My dad was a teacher at a special needs school for handicapped kids. So this is not our actual house, but this is a picture of a house from the estate, which I found on a website. So it was very basic, like typical 80s semi-detached house. But my memories of that period were generally good because I remember we would go out onto the grass in front of the house on the estate and there were other kids around, and my brothers tell me that that was a happy time for them as well. So the family was generally happier at that point. But I still remember there were these elements of social anxiety. I would sort of cling to my mum and be quite needy and that kind of way as well. So things really started to change for me in 1986 around age 5, or actually at age 5. My dad got a different job up in Gloucestershire near Gloucester. So we moved up there, and this was a big shift for the whole family. We went from this kind of suburban estate setup with lots of kids and families around, lots of friends and stuff, to then moving right out into the middle of nowhere, basically. And it was a very isolated village. And my parents were looking for a house. They sold their house and moved up, but they didn't even have a house at that point. So we ended up living in a caravan, 5 of us. And tension started to build up. It was like a pressure cooker, a family of 5 living in this tiny little caravan on a caravan site. The whole area seemed very, very bleak to me at that time. Although it's kind of picturesque, there's like elements of rural deprivation. There's high drug use in the countryside in that area. And as you can see in this picture on the left, it looks very nice, but this is actually the village where I grew up. But it is predominantly grass, and then you've got some houses. And what you find that young people around those kind of areas, you have like young chavs, and they're very bored. They drink a lot, they take a lot of drugs because they're just young, really bored people, and there's not a lot of people around your age, and it's just like a very tragic, sad kind of scene. So kind of looks nice for the older generation, picturesque, but for younger people, a lot of drug abuse, a lot of boredom. Most of those problems come out of boredom and quite a lot of social isolation as well, for sure. So the next picture, while we were living in this caravan, so we're looking for a house, and my dad, they didn't have money because they got 3 kids, and my dad's a teacher at a special needs school, and my mum's also a supply teacher. So then this is not the actual picture of our house, but because I don't have any pictures of that. But this is basically what it was like. There were times there was earth floors. It was a shell. My dad bought a house because that was all he could afford at that time. And he thought that he could renovate it because he had actually renovated a small cottage before and flipped it, and it had kind of done okay for him. Back in those days, I think he bought it for like £6,000 and sold it for £10,000. We're going way back. But so that was the house prior to this. And he thought very ambitiously, like, yeah, I'm going to do the same thing here. Problem is, it took him about 15 years to get the house into a kind of livable condition. So for a lot of the time growing up, we had no ceilings. You could see right up into other rooms. At one point, we were using ladders to get up and down stairs. There were earth floors. There was lots of vermin and stuff. You would have mice living in the walls, birds living in the chimney, lots of slugs. We would come down in the morning, find slug trails everywhere, up in the cupboards, lots of mice. And it just felt like a really messed up situation, to be honest. As I said here, we basically lived in a bomb site from the 1986 to 95. So from the age of 5 to the age of 14. And things started to fall apart once we moved into the countryside. It was very like it was a pivotal time for me because I was 5 and I was starting my first proper school, and kids were going from their secure little houses and starting school, which is already scary. I was starting school from a caravan. We didn't have a house at that time, so I already felt super insecure. And then we're starting a new school, and I haven't even got a home to go home to. So there was that, and then my oldest brother was 12 years old. He had to start a new secondary school, and I remember him never getting established. It was always just problems for him from the minute he hated moving up there because he had left friends behind. So this moving into the countryside started a lot of problems for us. Family started to fall apart. So about 4 years after we moved up there in 1990, there were problems with my family, my parents' marriage. My mum attempted suicide, got hospitalized in Gloucester Royal Hospital after an overdose. She was in there for about 2 weeks. I remember that very clearly. And then very shortly after that, my oldest brother was actually, at the age of 15, he was put into social services, which is effectively a kind of a group home, they call it in America. He was acting out, and he had actually burgled a house, and the house was a police officer's house. And my parents felt, on top of all the stress of what was going on in their relationship and all the rest of it, they couldn't handle having this delinquent son because he was running around and terrorizing the village with his group of like delinquents at that time. And then him breaking into this police officer's house, that was like the final straw. And what they did is they just phoned up social services, said, I can't cope with my son. You need to take him off our hands for a bit. And the idea was that it was going to be temporary, but my brother was very stubborn, and he dug his heels in and was extremely hurt by this, I think. And then he just never came back to live with the family. And he got into heroin, living in that group home in social services, in a kind of group foster home. He was put into foster care after that. And that was like the beginning of the end of his life, really. He was a heroin addict after that. And then he finally overdosed in the year 2000 at the age of 26. So all around this time, just bad memories for me. Like I remember by the age of 10, I started to have like OCD type behaviors. I used to have this feeling that I could never clear my throat properly. So I would always be going and making these weird sounds. I had other little ritual behaviors where I'd be touching my face in these kind of like, I had patterns for how I would do clear my eyes and touch my face and stuff. And I also, at that time, I remember I would get a virus a lot whenever there was a thing where I'd have to do something often social, like if there was a group school visit where I'd have to go away from home and stay with all the other students. Like if we went on to like an adventure camp or something, all of a sudden I would get this virus, and I would go to the doctor, and he said, oh, it's like glandular fever. But then my mum realized at one point, she was like, is it because you don't want to go away on this adventure camp? And I was like, yeah, it is. And then we figured out it was like this, I kept getting this psychosomatic virus, which was linked to like fear of having to socialize. So I was a super like sensitive kid at that time, and I had social anxiety. And I remember at this time I would get intense blushing, like my face would feel like it was absolutely burning on fire, often in shops. And for a joke, like my brother thought this was great. He would be like, go up and ask that guy if I can get this thing in, get this t-shirt in a size small. So then I would go up, and he would just stand there like creasing up at how red and embarrassed. Like he thought this was a funny thing to do. It was like to basically shame me, like in front of shopkeepers and stuff. So I remember being really scared of doing stuff in shops, talking to people behind the counter. And around this time, there was just many things that were happening. Living in a really crazy, like unrenovated house that was a building site. That meant I couldn't invite people back to the house, and if I did, I was always like super apologetic, like, oh, I'm really sorry, we don't have any floorboards down, be careful, like keep your shoes on, we don't have any carpet. Or I was always trying to explain my situation, and we didn't have any money, so my dad always drove like the most banged out cars, which people thought was funny. And so there's just like this feeling of being different. We lived in a different house. My brother was put into foster care, so that was very different. Our family, basically, there was like a broken family. My parents were always talking about divorce, which made me super insecure. My mum would be very hysterical and come running up to me. I remember when we were living in the caravan when I was 5, and she would be like, "You got to decide now. Who are you going to live with? Me and your dad are getting divorced." So I lived with this fear of divorce all the time. I imagined my family breaking up as being like a fate worse than death, basically. So it made sense. I had all these very, very deep rooted sense of insecurity. I never felt safe, never really had like a secure home base to call my own as growing up. So that was a very bleak period from the age of like 1986 up to 95. And in this next slide, you can see what I looked like at age 15. So when I was younger, I actually really acted out by taking my frustrations out on other people. I was bullied psychologically and emotionally by my mother and my brothers. So then I became a bully and I used to act out at school. And I remember my head teacher was like threatening. At one point, she said, "You need to see an educational psychologist or something." Because I used to basically verbally and emotionally abuse other kids, which I can see in hindsight was because I was acting out from all the frustration and the turbulence at home. And then my way of reacting to that was when I got branded a bully at my secondary school at age 11 or 12, I decided to flip it completely round, and I put all this pressure on myself to be completely perfectionist. I excluded myself completely. Other kids would beat me up. My name was Edward Barton, and I was working hard at school. So obviously I became a target of bullying. So I welcomed this. I was like, yeah, please beat me up because now I'm not the bully. I'm being bullied, which made me feel better about myself. So as you can understand, there's all this very complicated internal world going on for a 14 or 15-year-old or even younger, which I'm sure you can relate to because people who struggle with social anxiety often have very complicated and difficult emotional internal landscapes. So by the age of 15, I then started to go off the rails. And I'd pushed myself so hard with perfectionism and stuff. Then I started to basically go the other way and I started to drop out. I remember very clearly in 1996, I had been this perfect student and I always shunned my oldest brother's drug use. He would come back at times. So he was back living at home at this time from his foster home. And that would happen all through the years. He would go away, come back, go away, come back. So I remember this one time, everyone was doing hash at school, smoking hash, and I was the only one that wasn't. And I was like, I could see the guys that were smoking hash were like the bad boys and they were getting laid. And my hormones were acting up. Naturally, I was getting horny and I was like, well, I want to try cannabis. I want to see what all the hype is about. And if I do cannabis, the young guys that are doing it and selling it at school, they're getting the girls. So like maybe I'll get girls as well. So I went into my brother's room and he was smoking. I was like, oh, can I try some of that? So then I started to smoke hash with my 2 oldest brothers. I was like 15 and it really was a gateway drug because I loved it because I had so much tension and anxiety. And then when I started to smoke hash, I felt really relaxed. And there was like this voice inside me when I did it. I was like, oh, this is your thing. This fits with you so well. And I remember I loved it. And then from there, quickly, I started to do speed. I started to do ecstasy, started to do mushrooms right around age 16. And this is when things started to get worse and worse, really. Like by the age of 19, I took a gap year and I started to travel. This is a picture taken in Venezuela with like a guy. We were staying on his boat and he was a crazy addict. And I went to places like the Philippines. And this is where I came into contact with crystal meth for the first time. So I started smoking crystal meth and I met another traveler from Bristol there who was in his 40s. And that was a bad relationship because when I got back to the UK, he hooked me up with other bigger dealers. And I started to then buy weed by the ounce and then the kilogram. I started to buy ecstasy tablets by the dozens. I started to buy smoke crack and to buy not massive amounts of crack, but I was buying amounts of crack, pills, which ecstasy, and big amounts of weed because he was growing it and knew people that was growing it. And basically, I got in with a bad crowd down in Bristol, and this was right around 2000 when there was a very big influx of Jamaican yardie gangsters into the cocaine supply market in Bristol. So there was a lot of Jamaicans running crack cocaine in areas of like Campbell Street, Argyle Street, and St. Paul's. And we would go down there with our friend who lived down there, this guy in his 40s, and we would go and smoke crack cocaine, smoke heroin. And basically, I was doing small scale dealing. And I was just going off the rails and I didn't care about myself at all. I had so many problems going on inside my head. I really was just basically on a self destructive mission at that point. So I went to uni with this mindset as well, and I did very badly at uni and didn't achieve my potential at all. And then 2004, there was an opportunity came up to actually go and teach English in China, and I nearly dropped out in the end of my second year because of my drug use and so on. And then I started to get psychotherapy. It was the first time I came into contact with a counselor, and that changed things around for me. And then by my third year, I was like, I've got to try and claw this back and actually graduate. So I started to try and get more positive. I saw a careers advisor and they told me about this opportunity to go to China. So by 2014, that was my graduation year. I basically flunked with a low 2.2, which is a C. It's what you get if you just don't study and drink and take drugs, basically, which is what I did. So I moved to China, but I still had these like self-destructive tendencies. I still had very bad social anxiety. So once I got to China, this was a picture of me taken on one of the nights where I would get blackout drunk every single weekend. Drink on Friday night, drink on Saturday night, sometimes drink in the week. There was a little bit of drug use there as well, but pretty much off that. And I had very bad porn addiction. I would spend hours in my room watching internet porn, like 4 or 5 hours on a binge on a hangover sometimes. So internet porn addiction and sexual frustration was also a massive part of my life at that time. And there's a picture here taken of me in China. I'm completely wasted there because that's the only time I would have the courage to speak to women. And you can see I'm trying to hit on this girl and she's absolutely having none of it, not impressed at all. And that's what would happen. I would get rejected, get frustrated, wake up hungover and just masturbate, to internet porn the whole day. At that point, my income, I was making £350 a month. My self-concept, as you can see, I was kind of emo skater clothes, wearing a Thundercats t-shirt, thinking that was kind of cool. And this is like my ironic dress sense. And at that time, I just thought it was really cool to get as fucked up as you could. I thought it's like, oh, I'm debauched, So I was like this alcohol, drug abusing smoker. And I thought this was kind of cool. My core beliefs are basically I'm a bit messed up, I'm weird, I'm a loser, I'm not interested in money, that's vulgar. Mainstream people who go out, have friends, listen to mainstream music, dress nicely, do nice things, they're idiots. They're just lemmings, they're sheep. I'm too cool for that, I'm too alternative. My daily habits was I was using internet porn, eating lots of sugar and unhealthy food, ultra processed food, drinking alcohol 2 to 3 times a week, smoking a lot. My internal narrative at that point was like, I'm going to stay in China forever because, no one really gives me any hassle here. I can kind of be invisible. I was basically hiding out because it was a way to avoid social contact. So my social anxiety wasn't so bad. There's no expectations on you there because you're just this like novelty white foreigner. And I remember walking around the park on a hangover thinking, I'm so repulsive. I'm so ugly. I can't even get girlfriend. What am I going to do? I was like, well, don't worry, because I saw these expats sometimes in the park there. And I thought, well, look, those guys, they're complete wasters, complete losers, and they've got a wife. So I was like, don't worry, one day, I remember this thought process very clearly. One day you will at least get a wife here. So that's what I was thinking. That's who I was and what was going on inside my head at that point. And I was like 23, 24 at this time when a lot of people are coming into their prime of their life. I just had all these crazy scripts going on inside my head and limiting beliefs. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I've been going on. So 2005, basically, I had like a little life crisis. I was like, what the hell am I doing? I moved to another city in China and I decided to actually start learning Chinese properly. At this point, I was still unhealthy, ultra processed food, drinking, and high avoidance behaviors. My social anxiety was getting worse and worse. The longer I stayed out in China, the more my social anxiety escalated because I wasn't really being stimulated with normal conversation with Westerners on a daily basis. I had a scarcity mindset at that time about money. I had very little money. I had a scarcity mindset about women. I had a terrible apartment. At one point, I was living in an apartment where it actually froze over in the kitchen. and the faucet would leak water and it would just be a solid icicle when I went in to try and get water in the morning. There was mice in that apartment. I was making very poor money as an English teacher while studying Chinese. Very bad social anxiety. As you can see, I had a poor diet. The quality of my skin is bad. You can see from my posture, I had this C-shaped posture, just very like low self-esteem, very poor posture. I was a total nice guy, totally unassertive. I could not handle confrontation. I was working at a kindergarten at one point. I was completely manipulated by my Korean boss, this woman who would make me do whatever she wanted, make me work any hours she wanted. And she also ripped me off with money. And of course, I would internalize this anger as well. I wasn't a total doormat. It would get internalized. I'd get very frustrated and look at guys with girlfriends and think, what the hell is that about? Why can they do that? And it made you embittered. I was becoming misanthropic. I was turning against the world, becoming very negative, pessimistic. My social life at that time was I had one dysfunctional friend who had come with me from uni, and he would lord it over me and be much more confident than me and sort of talk down to me. And it was a dysfunctional relationship to be in. And my weekends, I spent more nights than I could ever tell you just sitting in front of YouTube, drinking red wine by myself and listening to music and stuff. And I'm going to fast forward now. So basically, from 2005 to 2011, I based my identity and my life around studying Chinese. So my esteem did actually improve a little bit because I was operating from a sphere of more capability. I found that I was actually quite good at learning Chinese, and this made me feel better. I went back to England to do a master's degree, had all these high hopes that when I graduate, it's going to unlock everything. You know, everyone was like, oh, you've invested all these years, 6 years in learning Chinese, and it's going to unlock everything. It's going to be, you're going to have the world at your feet. And that wasn't how it turned out at all. I graduated, I couldn't find a job. I went on the dole, which is on being on welfare. You get a stipend from the government of about £200 a month or something. I don't remember clearly. And I couldn't get a job. And then I'm in England at this point, and then an opportunity came up for a £600 a month internship. And this is designed for 21-year-old school leavers, basic university leavers. And I was 32, and I had to bow and scrape to get an internship in Beijing just so that I could get back to China, because I didn't have any options. And I thought China was my best option at that point. And I'm very grateful to China because it has also helped me out so many times when England has basically screwed me over. And I became more and more embittered. I was living in Beijing doing this awful internship where there was just nothing for me to do, and I was just wasting my time with the British Council. And I was getting more and more embittered. I was like, what have I studied for? What have I spent all my life doing this hard work for? And then eventually things changed for the better when I got a job at the British Embassy. I was 32 at that point, but this was still a entry-level job with a wage bracket that was designed for a fresh graduate. And my boss was like 6 years younger. He was like 6 years younger than me or something. So it still felt humiliating, even though it looked good on paper that I was working for the British Embassy. It was still nowhere near my true potential. And I felt humiliated because everyone there had been to great universities, was much younger than me. And I was this loser who had gone to Hull University, which is one of the worst cities in England and one of the worst universities. And it still felt like a bit of a humiliation. And then my turning point came. There was a mirror moment when I was 32. I was in this shitty shared apartment in Beijing, and I was in this really pokey bathroom one morning. I remember looking at myself after my shower. I had dark circles around my eyes. I'd been doing cocaine the weekend before. I was really pale. I was skinny fat. I was spending all the money that came in just on drinking and cocaine and stuff. And then my internal self-esteem thermostat, this is what I call it, basically recognized that, like, hang on, 32, you thought you were going to be more than that? Because I remember growing up, I remember thinking 32, that's like the age when you're a man and you have everything together. And when I looked at myself at that point, I was 32. I drew a line in the sand, and I was like, this has to stop today. I have to completely make changes absolutely today. So that's what I did. That's really where things started to turn around for me, and how I became the person that I am today. Really, that was like the starting process. I started working out religiously. Prior to that, I told myself, well, my dad's skinny and my brothers are skinny. I haven't got the genetics for it. And then somehow I got this more positive voice in my head of like, I'm going to throw the kitchen sink at it. And if it doesn't work, then we can say you don't have the genetics for it. But until then, let's reserve judgment. So I hired a personal trainer. I started eating really well, started getting more sleep as a result of working out. I discovered personal development. I did my first life audit where I looked at my health, wealth, finances, and so on, and started to write down all of my weak points and stuff, which I'd never even thought of before. And through this process, I really got addicted to productivity and positivity, and my mind really started to change. And right around this point, I remember very clearly, I decided instead of taking the subway to work in Beijing, I would buy a bike from Decathlon and I started to cycle. And when I cycled, I started to put podcasts on it. And at first, I listened to In Our Time by Melvin Bragg, which is like educational on BBC Radio 4, because I was trying to feed my brain. I was like, I need something more than this, not just like book learning. And that's when I came across personal development podcasts. And I remember listening to this one, Knowledge for Men. And it blew my mind because it was talking about why you suck at dating, why you've got no money, why you're out of shape. And I really started to actually recondition my mind by listening to this stuff every single day. It opened me up to a whole different paradigm and a whole different way of seeing myself and the world. And I was listening to people that were just on a whole different level of positivity and stuff from what I'd been around growing up in the countryside and all these negative drug abusers and stuff. You got to bear in mind, my oldest brother was a drug addict. My mum and dad were super stressed in a very rocky relationship. My other brother, rock bottom self esteem, was also taking lots of drugs. So I'd never had like success or a positive mindset modeled for me. And these guys were doing that for me. And I started to recondition my brain. I remember listening to stuff by Jim Rohn, who said things like, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. So this is a picture of a Chinese personal trainer. This is like symbolic of the guy that I hired at that time. And this was all, I was starting to invest in myself. I started to buy and read lots and lots of books on productivity, self-improvement, that kind of thing. And I got introduced to a really cool mentor called Ruben Payen, who's he actually trains Chinese UFC fighters. And you may have seen the Leech, who's a Chinese UFC fighter. He trains him. He was a super positive guy, used to be a US Marine, has climbed Everest and lots of the major mountains in the world. So I started to get myself around like online mentors, cyber mentors, if you like, that I was getting through digital books and through podcasts. And then I spent more time around people like Ruben, and I started to invest in online courses like Coursera and stuff. I was watching lots of courses. Many of them were free, but I was still investing my own time in myself. So this was a really big change for me and a really big phase. And I just started to get really juiced up and think, wow, I've actually got potential, which I've never used or looked into, and just started to get really excited about my own life for the first time ever. And as I started to look at all the things I needed to take care of, then the thing of social anxiety became first and foremost of like, well, I really, really need to look at that. Also, around this time, I started to study a lot of stuff around money because I was always broke and money had always been a big issue in my family. And I realized that was linked to my low self esteem. My dad always driving like a clapped out Ford Fiesta, people laughing at us because I didn't have the right clothes, and my mum had to buy like the most budget food and it would be in my lunchbox, and people were like, oh, haha, you eat nothing but Tesco value. All your food is Tesco value, which is the most budget food. So we basically like, yeah, I had peasant clothes, peasant food, a total scarcity mindset financially growing up. So when I started to read about this stuff, this made a big influence on me. And I actually started a side hustle, which I'll get onto later, which became very important as a part of my development. So at this time as well, I actually started my side hustle, and then it gradually took over and got more and more successful to the point that I could actually quit my job at the embassy, because I realized the job at the embassy was really feeding my low self-esteem. Having a stuck-up boss who had gone to a great university and was way younger than me, he used to talk down to me. I remember somebody in the office, an incoming delegation had come from abroad and said, oh, Ed's done a really good job as an interpreter and so on. And my boss wanted to take that away from me and was like, oh, he's only support staff. So I started to grow in self-esteem. It was like, fuck that. I'm not just going to be like some little geek boy in the embassy. So I wanted to start my own thing. And all the entrepreneurial podcasts and self-development stuff I was listening to was like, get a side hustle, build your own business. So I started to realize like I really needed money, because at that time, and I know this is something I haven't talked about because it's a sensitive subject for a lot of people, and I don't want to come across as like brash or vulgar, but it was a big issue in my family. And up until that point, my dad kept me in a position of dependency where he would say like, "Oh, well, you could always move back in home and stuff like that," and that is just not what I wanted to hear. So I was like, if I'm ever to get free from this messed up relationship with my parents, I need to get out from under them completely financially and never ever have to rely on them for anything. So then I became very, very motivated to get my own side hustle going and make my own money. And everyone that I listened to on these podcasts, they had said, if you want to make money, get around people that have money and ask them how they're doing it and if you can offer services to them for free. So I knew my dad had one friend who had worked in the banking industry and who was a seven-figure earner. And I got in contact with him and we talked about potentially doing a business because he was a finance expert who was fluent in Korean, and I had experience in China and was fluent in Chinese. So we looked at potentially doing a business together around that. And I also got in touch with another old friend who I'd heard is doing very well, and I offered services to him for free using Chinese language. And we actually reignited our old friendship and have become really good friends to this day. And he helped me out loads, and he taught me about digital marketing and affiliate marketing and promoting products online. And along with a bunch of other guys, I quit my job in the embassy and they were all moving to Malaysia. And I was like, I'm going to move to Malaysia. And we worked out of our friend's office. So there was this circle of entrepreneurs. And that's very, very important. If you want to change your life, you want to be around a group of like minded people. And environment is super important. You may well need to change up your environment. I'm not saying go and move to another country, but even if it means getting a bigger apartment, moving out of your parents' house, whatever, a change of environment can be a massive catalyst for change in other areas of your life. So, what actually did happen is I did start to become the average of the five people I spent the most time with. And as you can see here, I transformed myself. I'm not saying I'm a beast here, but I'm 85 kilograms. I was eating clean, lifting every day, getting lots of sleep, waking up at 5, journaling out, my goals and stuff. I had lots of success habits. I would plan my life. I had all this new level of intentionality, which I never had before. I developed an abundance mindset. I was positive. I started to be extremely excited by all the possibilities in life. So this is like a complete 180 shift from where I was a few years before in China, where I thought people are like a virus. The world is just this dark, desolate rock floating around in space. Now I was like, so excited by all the possibilities for myself and others and for life. And there's something here which I've never shared with people before because it's what scammy make money online people do. And I never wanted to be associated with that. So I'm actually sharing a screenshot of my earnings. By the time I was 35, I was making $20,000 a week on certain weeks. I'm not saying that was the best week in that period there. I'm not saying that was happening every single week, but you can see in another screenshot from my phone, there were certain days where I was making in excess of $2,000 per day. So this completely changed my whole life. I'd gone from making £30,000 a year at the embassy to then making £30,000 a month when I had my own digital marketing business. So everything that had been prophesized in all these podcasts about how your life changes when you start working out and getting around positive people. If you're closed-minded, you're going to say that's all a scam. It's bullshit. I remember trying to help a friend out and he said, it's a pyramid scheme. These personal development gurus are a pyramid scheme. And I was like, fine, well, it's what's helped me. And if you implement their advice, it actually works, getting a more positive life and all the rest of it. So I then went into a different phase of my life, having been completely starved of sex and so on, and been super unhappy for so long. I then went into like kind of a bit of a hyper materialist phase. I'm not saying this is my true self, but this was my identity and my persona at that time. This is me drinking Moe out of the bottle in a stretch Humvee on the way to a party in Vegas. Another party here where we're just drinking massive bottles of Grey Goose, all paid for. This was also in Vegas. So at this point, I started to study how to pick up women. I literally just walked into a club in Vegas, had been in there 5 minutes, got this girl. As you can see, this is a far cry from where I was before when I couldn't speak to women at all, was terrified of women. So there's a picture here which shows a change over about 8 years. Here you can see I call myself, this is just a joke really, simp to pimp. So I basically went from basically being a real loser to someone that was hanging out in Hakkasan in Vegas drinking Jeroboams of Moe. And I know it's a bit crass. I know it's crass. At the time, I was like, oh, in previous times, I wouldn't have done it. I'd be like, oh, that's so vulgar, so crass. But it was just fun. It was the diametric opposite of what I'd always been. So it was just a phase, if you like. And as an ENFP, what I really loved and had always loved was travel. So I then was able to use some of my money to travel. I went to New York. This was an island we went to in the Philippines, Paris, LA, Cairo, New Delhi. I mean, I went to Jordan, I went to Israel, I went to Costa Rica, just was able to go wherever I'd really wanted to. Travel the world a couple of times round, which is exactly what I'd always really wanted to do. So that was amazing. And this is not a brag. I'm just trying to show you that if you get your mind right, your life can change in whatever direction you want it to, basically. I then went from like, in my past, scarcity and just getting by and scraping existence. I then started to design my life. And I remember talking to a therapist and she said, well, what's your ideal life? And I said, doing BJJ and surfing every day. But I really wanted to go to Bali and I'd always wanted to live in the Philippines. So I actually moved to Bali and the Philippines for different periods of time. So this was in the Philippines, in Balea, where we're on a surfing trip, surfing in the Philippines here, like absolute paradise, doing BJJ. This is when I lived in Bali. I also learned to ride a motorbike because I used to drive my mum's Nissan Micra and felt like, oh, this is too much car for me. So I always wanted to learn to actually be a man and ride a motorbike and drive a proper truck, which I did. I had a 4x4 truck, which I used to drive around in the Philippines. This was me surfing. So I really started to tick off all the things that I wanted to do in my life. And this was a picture taken around that time just to show a bit of the contrast from where I was before. So my dress sense now is I used to wear, this is Ralph Lauren, smart casual. And I'm not being superficial. I'm just saying this all makes a difference. This is all a reflection of your external world. My core beliefs, I was very optimistic, positive, and excited about life. I believed in the Henry Ford quote at this point, where he said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're absolutely right. Financially, I was independent, fairly financially free. I had become a property owner, so I was a landlord and making money from my own property, making passive income. My self-concept was that I decided to make my mess my message. So I was coaching at this point and found a lot of fulfillment and purpose from that because I was using all my mistakes to try and help out other guys. I had grown to love and accept myself, even my difficult past and so on. I had healthy self-esteem at this point. I had a positive worldview. I believe people are inherently good and we're all united by our own internal struggles. And I had very positive habits at this time. I was working out, I was productive, I had lots of success habits. So at this point, I really started to shed my skin again. And this is something that's really important. As you'll see throughout this, what has happened is there's been a series of identity and self-concept shifts. And this is something I'm a huge proponent of and believer in, and something which I work on with my clients, is that your habits and what you get out of life is very much based on your own identity. So if you identify as a loser who's going to be stuck with social anxiety their whole life, that is what you'll get. But throughout my evolution from that point to where I am now, I've tried on and outgrown multiple different personas, self-concepts, and identities. And that might sound kind of phony because you're like, you are who you are. And anything else is not genuine, but that's not the case at all. You're forever, throughout your life, you're always trying on different personas. You might see yourself as the class clown, and then you'll become the responsible father, and then you're the loving grandfather. There's all these different skins that we put on and shed throughout our life. So it's very careful to be aware of them and also use it to your advantage. If you want to build strong habits, you say, no, I'm an athlete, therefore I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I'm someone who's productive, therefore I get up at 5 a.m. Our habits fit with our self-identity. So at this point in my life, I had identified that coaching was really what I wanted to do because I see my whole evolution as a graduation through these different levels. And as I progressed and I went through my kind of ultra materialistic phase of wearing a gold chain and bracelets and hanging out in Vegas and having sex with lots of girls and doing all that kind of stuff, that's something that I needed to do as part of my evolution. And that was my self-esteem growing and so on. And then I got to my self-actualization phase, which is what I've been in since I started coaching, really, because I knew that I needed to find purpose. And this is what would give me the most meaning in my life, is helping others. Because at that point, when I was hanging out in Vegas, traveling the world, drinking, having a great time, partying, having sex with girls, it was great, but there was still something missing. And this is when I had to do a lot of drilling down and working out what it was that what piece of the puzzle was missing. And it was that purpose and that meaning part. And I didn't have that until I started my coaching. So I really started to feel great once I started to do that. And I actually dropped all of that in 2019. I had a six-figure income. I was not purely from coaching, still from online businesses. I was coaching and loving that, but I had to leave it because I was like, I still need to do more of my own self-actualization work. And that's when I actually decided to pursue the spiritual life, which is what I'd been interested in, right? Actually, from being introduced to Buddhism by my first psychotherapist when I had counseling at university, age 20 or 21, he introduced me to Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhism. And at university in my second year, I started to get exposed to Zen Buddhism, and through using Zen meditation and psychedelics, I opened up a door to like whole different levels of awareness and depth of my own living. And I realized that was something I always wanted to pursue. And in the back of my mind from that age, I always wanted to be a monk in Japan because I'd read books on that and read accounts of people who had done that, and it looked incredible. So that was a seed which had gone in, and it took 17 years for it to fully germinate and flourish. So by the age of 38, I was then looking for a teacher. I went all around the world. I went to Thailand, Burma, England, Scotland, Japan. I stayed in monasteries and all these places. And it was actually the teacher that I found in Japan that I decided to go and train with. At this point, I was reading lots of books on Thai monastic training and so on. I just loved this concept of training, working on yourself, spiritual training. And this phrase, monastic training, hit me really hard. And I was like, that's what I need to do, because I'm making money, I'm living a good life, but I'm still just like, it's disordered. I want to really be disciplined. And I just always wanted to be a monk. And I believe that is a big part of who I am, and still to this day is part of my identity. So this was actually my ordination ceremony in Japan. This is my 83-year-old teacher, who is a completely legitimate, bona fide Zen master, one of the most respected and revered Zen teachers in the Rinzai tradition, or in any tradition in Japan to this day. These are the other guys I got ordained with, and this is the Sangha behind me. And this was my time in a monastery in Japan. I'd be very happy to talk more about that on other videos if people are interested, and give you more details about that. I left that in March 2023. My mum had breast cancer, and there was pressing issues that I needed to deal with back in the UK and go and visit my mum and so on. So I actually left the monastery in Japan, moved back to the UK for a bit to visit family. And this brings me up to the point that we're at today, and my self-concept and how I see myself now. And I keep my head shaved, partly because I've got male pattern baldness, but I could keep more hair. But I see myself as trying to embody some of those monastic, disciplined aspects. I still train. I see myself as a person of training. In Japanese, it's called shugyo-sha, which means a person of training. So I'm either training for triathlon, training for swimming, spiritual training. I'm doing meditation at retreats, or I eat a clean diet because I see myself as always in training, spiritual training, physical training, mental training. And that's what stops me ever going too far off the path with my diet or my habits, because I'm an athlete, a mental and a spiritual, physical athlete, always in the process of training for something. Coaching and training are huge for me. This is my triathlete coach, Gwen, who I'm going to get on the channel another time. She's been a fantastic influence on me. She's an absolute beast. She might just look like a normal 40-something-year-old woman, but she absolutely isn't. She's incredible. She swims like a fish and is an absolute machine, a triathlon, a world champion, and has won so many accolades and is super competitive and super fierce competitor. So she's been a huge influence on me. This is my coach, and this was a picture of us taken after a coaching session. This is me on retreat in Malaysia with a great meditation teacher, and this is me after I've just finished a triathlon. So that's my self-concept now. That's my persona. I'm a coach and I'm a coachee. I'm a trainer and I'm a trainee. So that's also what keeps my life aligned and makes sure I don't eat too much sugar, don't drink any alcohol, don't smoke, don't do any of the things that I used to before, because my whole self-concept has changed. And my main interest now is to help others. Like service is what gives me the biggest amount of happiness. So the things that I learned from Zen training, such as service, simplicity, humility, I try to keep all of those things, try to be relatively humble if I can, although using YouTube feeds the ego and maybe isn't the best for being the most humble person you can be, but I try to keep my ego in check as much as possible. I live a very simple life. Everything I've got here, I can pack into a backpack and leave at any time. And I probably will leave to another country quite soon, and just try to keep things simple. And number one is to serve others. If I can help anybody with this video or any of my videos, then it's absolutely worth all the crap that I went through growing up. So I hope this has been useful for you. I hope you found some value in it. If you have, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit me up via the email, ed@thesocialanxietycoach.com, or hit me up in the comments if there's anything in this video which has raised questions for you want to ask more about. And yeah, that's everything for now. I just wanted to share a bit more about my story with you, and I hope you can use some of this to your advantage to get free of social anxiety, because it absolutely is possible, but it takes remodeling your internal world, and then you have to practice externally, and you have to remodel your physique and so on as well, your physical being. So that's all I've got for you. Hope it was helpful, and speak to you all very soon.